Being overweight can be a shameful corner of our minds, something that we sometimes try to ignore, but it never really goes away. There's not a lot of support and gentleness in our social groups when it comes to the subject. People either pretend that the issue doesn't exist, especially in personal relationships, try to scam others by claiming that it's absolutely okay, and preference for not being obese is simply prejudice, despite the overwhelming medical evidence to the contrary, or nag others into losing weight by this or that trick. And the obesity epidemic proves how ineffective these methods are. And honestly, I was expecting the trends to reverse, starting in the 2010s, because there's just so much information and advice out there, and there's so much awareness that you'd expect the problem to start to decline. But apparently it's not the case. Apparently in the US, some population groups have reached the peak and they're stable, while others continue to increase. And as you look further into it, yes, there is a great array of advice out there, but most of it is either dead wrong, focuses on the wrong things, is not flexible and adaptable enough, or is not sustainable long term. Even more importantly, empathy is very rarely shown. Empathy for the scars overweight people desperately try to hide under their fat. Empathy for the pain being soothed by overeating. Unsurprisingly, as only surface symptoms are being treated with already poor advice, it's no wonder that to many people, losing weight seems like something that other people do, but that is not within their reach. Hello and welcome to the Valiant Growth podcast. I'm your host Philip Frey, and today I will be talking about my own weight loss journey and lessons that I've learned along the way. As an opening caveat, I am not an expert on the subject in any way. Neither have I done very thorough and properly deep research of it. Some of the principles that I will present here are really basic and are already well known. What I'm aiming to bring is the system around it, how to make it work, and how self-knowledge can aid in this journey. Now, this approach has worked for me, but I cannot really claim universality to it. Those of you on YouTube will be able to see a chart of my weight for the last year, while those of you listening to the podcast, I will include a link in the show notes, and I will also do my best to describe it. But before I get to the chart, let me talk about my history with weight in general before I started recording it. So, I had my peak at 18 years old, when I was weighing around 250 pounds or 115 kilograms. Which would classify me as obese according to the body mass index, which you might be familiar with, but if not, it's basically a way of determining your healthy weight or where you are on the scale according to your height and your weight. It's not perfect, but it's a good ballpark estimate. And from a physiological point of view, this was due to the fact that I was eating large portions often, and I wasn't doing a lot of exercise. I also didn't have supportive people around me who could provide proper advice and gentleness and understanding in the situation. And from a psychological point of view, food was my main tool of soothing my pain, and I wasn't in a very good place at those times. And there were so many things that I couldn't change as a teenager in my environment and in the course of my life, or at least I didn't feel that I could change, that I still had to cope with. And when I moved out and went to university, which I did in a different city, I lost around 33 pounds or 15 kilograms. I think a significant factor in that psychologically was that I moved away from my family system, though I kept contact. I also ended a relationship that wasn't psychologically healthy and that has been going on for 3 years. And again, physiologically, I was just developing my food management skills, which in practice often meant that in the dorm where I lived, I often had no food. And I was caught up in being excited and learning about economics and just everyday life. I would often just notice that, wow, I have a really strong headache. Turns out I haven't eaten anything that day. And that led to some losses, unplanned losses. And at this point, my body mass index got between obese and overweight. But after that first year, especially the first 6 months, it kind of stayed steady. And it still wasn't in a place that was healthy or aesthetically pleasing to me. And then shortly before moving away from my country and coming here to the United Kingdom, I started paying attention to nutrition, and I made the decision that this is something that I have to take care of. I had made that decision many times, but this was the first time where I began developing a framework, and this is where the chart begins. And the moment I started that, and I will detail what I did, I quickly lost 7 pounds or 3 kilograms in 2 weeks. That's the first bit of the chart. And I also regained that during an uncertain period after having moved, looking for a job. It was a pretty intense period. And then after things solidified around me and I had more willpower to spare and I got a job, I lost around 45 pounds or 20 kilograms in 8 months, which you can see is the big decline on the chart, which is not an amazing pace, but it's very respectable and very sustainable. A part of that was because I got a physical job. I'm pretty sedentary when left to my own devices. But even more importantly, I believe it was because I had started therapy, I had started really focusing on self-knowledge, I had started really focusing on gentleness and respectfulness, and that created an air of mental health and stability that aided me in being able to keep up the habits that I will bring up shortly over the long term. And I actually hit healthy body mass index territory. And if you look at the chart, I've moved again, and that was another period of uncertainty. I regained a bit of it, and now that things are more stable, I am losing the weight again, and I intend to keep going for a little bit more, a few months more, until I get to a weight that is comfortably within the healthy range. Now let me talk about the principles that I used. In how I understand it, and in my experience, weight loss is simply a calorie maths game. Now there are people who would dispute this and who'd probably dispute everything that I'm going to say, but since this worked for me, I'm confident that it can work for others as well. So as I said, it's maths, and your goal is to build a calorie deficit. Simply burn more calories than the ones you consume, and if you do that, your body starts burning both fat and muscle. And I believe that that depends largely on your protein intake. But regardless, if you're in my shoes and I didn't have a lot of muscle to lose anyway, that was something that I wasn't too worried about. Now, when it comes to what is the best and most effective way of building a calorie deficit, there's a lot of unhelpful and kind of misleading public information out there. As usual, mainstream opinions are wrong in that, and there are studies to back this up, exercise is a way less effective method of losing weight than controlling diet and taking a look at diet. The truth is that for most of us, or at least the ones who are not that physically active, most of our calorie burn is pretty fixed. And doing a bit of exercise on top of that every now and then in a week is not going to make a major difference. And it takes, I believe, a lot of willpower, at least to me personally. It takes a lot more willpower to do something actively than to refrain from something more passively. And I see this mistake being made by people over and over again, that they go to the gym and they spend an effective half hour burning calories. Then they come home and they say, okay, well, now I can treat myself because I've been active and I've earned it and I need this reinforcement. And then in 5 minutes they eat way more calories than they have, that they could have ever burnt off. And of course it doesn't work and they're disappointed in the results and they give up. So yes, controlling portions, controlling your diet, controlling your intake is, for most people, a much easier and much more effective way of losing weight. And diets don't have to be these crazy things that you hear about all the time, these extreme, insane things where you're just drinking water or just eating X and all of that. That's popular with crash dieting, like people trying to fit into a dress or something like that. But for long-term weight loss, you can fundamentally eat anything as long as you pay attention to the calories and you do portion control. Now, eating certain types of food will help you. And that's an area that I hesitate to go into because I don't have a lot of expertise and it hasn't significantly impacted my weight loss strategy. But it is undeniable that some foods will make you feel fuller. There's some foods out there that basically have no calories and fill you up completely. Spinach is an example, whereas other foods, especially very sugary ones, will just give you a high but leave you hungry a few hours later. And they also have sugary sodas where they don't fill you up at all, but they add a lot of calories to your diet. But fundamentally, as long as you fit in your set calorie limits, you can eat anything you like. And you can experiment with any food you like. And this is what I really like about this strategy, is that if you eat a chocolate bar, you haven't just destroyed your diet and you don't just have to give up. And you can be more flexible in general. Whereas with some of these popular diets, you're really restricted. And even if you have a quote-unquote cheat day, what if you want to eat something that's not in your diet twice a week? Or what if you want to have some different kind of variety than the foods advocated by that diet? And that can be an issue. But if you're just going for calorie control, nothing is fundamentally a disaster. And also another thing that I like about this strategy is that nothing is lost even if you don't fit within your calorie limits. And you don't have to perform excellently every day of the week or 6 days of the week. What is fundamentally important is that you wake up every morning with the goal of eating X amount of calories. And if it doesn't happen, it doesn't matter that much. You wake up tomorrow and you try it again. And in the end, if you're more often successful than not, you're still going to lose weight. It's a slow and steady race. And of course, as you get more used to it, the easier it becomes. Now, let me talk of very practical steps, having talked of principles, how I began and how I would begin now if I were in the same situation. So the first step is figure out how many calories you burn and just Google calorie burn calculator and you will find something that, based on your weight and your level of activity, will give you a ballpark estimate of how much calories you're burning a day. And then set a deficit target. That is the difference between how much you burn, which you've just found out, and how much you're going to intake. And what I usually aim for is 800 to 1,000 calories which on paper means losing about 2 pounds or a kilogram a week. Now, when I look at my own effective rates, half of that is more common, but that is normal because you will not succeed every day. The next step is get yourself a bathroom scale and a kitchen scale. And you will use these to weigh yourself regularly and also weigh everything that you eat and log it. Now, with weighing yourself regularly, I actually do it every morning at the same time. And some people don't recommend using this because there is a lot of fluctuation between days, and you can have the most perfect intake control or doing a lot of exercise and actually see an uptick in your weight, and that can be demoralizing. But what I used is a website called caloriecounter.com, but I'm sure you can find other websites that are similar. And what they do over there, and this is also what you see in my chart, what you saw previously in my chart, is that there is a line for the actual measurements, but there is also a trend line, which is a 10-day rolling average for those of you into that kind of thing. And basically what that means is every day's up and down swings, which can be very significant, are smoothed out, and you kind of see the trend of where you're going. And even if there's an uptick that day, you look at the bigger picture and you will see that you're headed in the right direction. And when I say weigh everything you eat and log it, I mean actually log it. And this website has a feature like this, or you can do it on paper or however you like it. But it's important that you know how much you ate of something and how many calories were in there. And using a website can be especially helpful if you're also tracking vitamins and minerals and ensuring that you have a proper intake of that, which I did. And it helped me a lot in the beginning, but after some time I stopped doing that because I've worked out some food combinations that I know have all the vitamins and minerals and macronutrients that I need, and now I just count the calories in my head. But logging in the beginning definitely helped me a lot and definitely helped set up a habit of being mindful to what I eat. And basically from this point, all you have to do is log things and aim to have a calorie deficit, and the results will come. Faster, slower, it depends, but they will come. And you might want to build habits that aid you in this process. And this is a highly personal thing. This is something that you have to figure out. It depends a lot on your lifestyle, on your preferences. Something that helps me is, first of all, I log my weight pretty much the first thing in the morning. It is part of my morning routine, so that gets done consistently and I don't have to think about it anymore. Also, I know that the results are comparable because if you get your weight after you've eaten something already, then and another day you take it straight in the morning, there will be a lot of variation in there and it makes it unnecessarily inaccurate. Another thing that really helped me is the idea of intermittent fasting, which is only eating within a set time frame or even only eating just once a day, usually in the evening. And for me, this worked out a lot better than splitting up my calories over 5 or 6 meals. And I know that I will experience fullness and satiety once a day. And this is kind of cheating in a sense because one of the main ideas of intermittent fasting is that you no longer need to do calorie control and you just follow some rules and your body will tell you when you've had enough. But I kind of cheated and I combined the two methods and it really worked out well for me. And I will let you research this more thoroughly. I don't want to go into it too much. But if you're interested in this and you're wondering about the hunger, I can tell you that the adaptation period is pretty short. It's a week or two before you stop feeling hungry, as your body gets used to moving from eating often to eating only one time or a few times. And now I can usually go up to 24 hours without feeling any kind of significant hunger, any kind of overpowering hunger. But again, do your own research. I'm sure this is not recommended for everyone. Now, these are the practical steps, but something very important to keep in mind is that this is a shortcut in a sense. And just doing this is not sustainable on its own long term. This is dealing with the symptoms and not the roots of the problem. I think it's a very effective way of doing that, but it's still something that's pretty fragile because of this. Just like any other addiction, simply refraining from it is not going to sustainably solve the problem. That said, I think this can be very, very valuable as a first step in this journey. Your end goal is to learn the roots of why you're overeating and how that fits in your life and what kind of trauma you're trying to heal and what kind of situations you're trying to cope and what in your environment now leads you to it. But all of that is much, much easier to do when you already have a base of success. It's one thing to look back once you're in a healthy weight range and say, okay, I've got here, I have a track record of success, I know that I can do this shortcut method even if I gain all the weight back, so that's okay, and now let's look into deeper stuff. That's much easier than looking forward and saying, okay, I have a lot of pounds to lose, let me go into the deep stuff first. And I myself have more powered through the issue than actually done the self-knowledge work. This is something that I've only recently become interested in and actually plan to really dive deep in once I've achieved my weight goal. But there are general psychological principles in play here that I've figured out so far and that I will share with you, and hopefully in the future I can bring in an expert to talk about more in depth, or once I learn more, present it to you. So the psychological side, the way to cure the root of the problem is to, again, have a set of habits and attitudes. One of them, and a very important one, is mindfulness, bringing mindfulness into the issue. First, you must accept that this is something worth exploring. You don't have to agree with it, you don't have to be a fan of it, but you must embrace it as a fact of reality. And once you've done that, you can be mindful when you overeat. And I believe it's universally true that people overeat not systematically, not in a random way, but there are specific triggers and mental states that cause overeating. So if you bring mindfulness to this, it means really looking into what you feel in the moment when you're overeating. And that might not be realistic in the moment, but you can definitely look back when you're in a more stable situation and try to figure out what caused it, what kind of triggers led to it. For me, I usually overeat when I'm under a lot of stress or have been in a stressful or shameful situation. Also when I'm tired. And what you're aiming for is to very gently and very gradually, at a pace that feels natural to you, start to replace the soothing mechanism. Of course, you can also start to work on making your environment better, but let's take that as a fixed thing now. Healthy alternatives to soothing the pain through overeating, and by the way, this applies to a lot of other addictions as well. Smoking, shopping, drinking, drugs, sex, all of that. Replacing them in a healthy way means really bringing awareness to what is causing the issue and letting it come out. And that can be done through journaling, simply writing down what you felt in the moment, or it can be done through therapy and talking to your therapist about these emotions. Another thing to do is try to embrace the cyclical nature of this process of your growth in this area. You will not succeed every day, as I said. And if one of these calorie burn tools gives you a calculation to tell you that, oh, you will reach your goal on this date if you follow this approach and have this certain deficit, you will not achieve it. It's very unlikely that you will achieve it. It will always take you more time than you think. So might as well accept the fact that you will not be successful every day, or even you might have, as I did, certain months when it doesn't work and you regain a bit of weight, and try to be as gentle and as accepting of that as possible, and recognize that under extreme duress you might not have the willpower to stick to it, but when your situation stabilizes, you will very quickly lose that weight and continue on your journey. Also, your willpower will tend to increase in a sense, and the root will become weakened. And as such, I believe that the cycles will get shorter. The cycles when you're not making progress will get shorter and shorter. But even if they don't, the best way is to be a friend to yourself and not a dictator or this kind of movie coach where you're beating up yourself over your results. In short, embrace cyclicality. Also, recognize that you've probably been hurt. I don't think I'm making a big leap of faith, assuming that people who are overweight have been traumatized. I think that is the case most of the times. And why that is important is that, yes, you are responsible for your weight as an adult, but just because you're overweight right now doesn't mean that you're fundamentally wrong as a person, that you're a bad person, or that you are a broken person. A lot of damage has been done to you, and you can heal that. And you are overweight because of that damage, not because you're inherently flawed. And as you heal, this external cover of comfort, in a sense, will go away, will simply melt away. And I've heard this from people who have really embraced self-knowledge in this area, that the weight just disappeared. And that may or may not be your experience, but regardless, you are not a bad person for being overweight. And observe your language as you speak to yourself. Try to say the things out loud that are in your heads that you say to yourself. Of course, not necessarily in public, but where you feel safe. And really listen to it and consider, is this respectful or is this abusive? Is this helping me or is this hurting me? And be mindful of that. And the last thing that I would add to the psychological side is that you might choose to be private in your pursuit and to not share your goals, at least for the beginning phase, with other people. Now, this might vary from person to person and what kind of social circle you're in and how supportive your friends are. In my experience, the moment you commit to something publicly, it makes it more difficult and it increases the stakes. And when you're dealing with something that is very new and very challenging, you don't want to raise the stakes. So I would recommend staying private and letting others observe your weight loss rather than being really public about it. On the other hand, if you think that's something that might be helpful and it gives you energy and that you will rally people to your support, you can try that too. And this has been my summary of my weight loss journey and what I've learned along the way. As I've said, I will try to bring in experts that can really take the self-knowledge aspect to a new level in the future. Thank you for listening to the Valiant Growth podcast. If you enjoyed the show and think others might benefit, please share it. This show is in a very early phase, and what I need the most right now is an audience. And also, if you want to help out the show, please leave an iTunes review and like our page on Facebook. Oh, and also, I dare you to flourish today.